Hi guys, it's Khalid doing yet another video essay. This is going to be the fourth one. Um, kind of trying to navigate depression and hopelessness across like all the different political, economic, pandemic landscapes. Um, anyways, this one is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be one long piece and there's probably an emotional undercurrent, a bit of anger running throughout the whole thing. Anyways, let's go. The title of my essay is The Left Case for Throwing Marginalized Communities Under the Bus. Um, where this phrase comes from is within kind of like left spaces, like when people talk amongst each other. Um, there's this tendency from a group of people based on kind of the identity politics framework to demand that certain discourse, certain conversations, certain ways of talking and thinking about problems be done according to how they think is right. And in order to enforce that demand, they essentially use moral blackmail. This idea that if you don't do things the way they describe it, you are sacrificing groups of people with historic grievances, marginalized communities, people with little power. This is utter horseshit. Okay, first of all, these people who make that claim have no constituency. They're not speaking on behalf of anybody who chose them. They're speaking on behalf of themselves and on behalf of their own belief set. But more importantly, the problem doesn't actually lie with them. These people are morons. They have a religious attachment to identity politics as a political construct. They believe that it's effective and meaningful. In the same way that some people believe that prayer is an effective way of healing the sick. And I can't fault them for their stupidity. They were just brought up in the church. What the people that I do fault, the people that I'm genuinely angry at, are the people who come and whisper to me and tell me, hey, I understand that this identity politics stuff is bullshit, but we have to sort of succumb to it. We have to sort of negotiate with it, lest these people, these idiots, bolt, or they make a lot of noise, or they call us bad names, whatever it might be. That cowardice is what genuinely makes me angry. But I'm going to try to put my anger aside as much as possible. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow from the conversation. I'm going to borrow quite heavily from the conversation that I had a few weeks ago, where I put out a video essay called Picking a Politics, where I said that the conversations that we have about these different political modes are pretty stupid. We engage in it in the same way that people engage about like what their favorite color is, and we don't have an objective basis of measuring what should be considered a tool, a politics, an ideology, a way of looking at the world, and a set of practices and goals and all this other stuff. This package of stuff has no virtue onto itself. The only thing that matters is the objective, and making sure that you have the most efficacious way of actually achieving the objective. So what I'm going to try to do is go through identity politics, look at it under the microscope that I created in that discussion. And specifically, what I'm going to do is like just narrow in on kind of race politics, just because that was like it's pretty salient in the 2020 Democratic nomination process, as the thing that I'm going to test my analytical framework against and see, or I'm going to test the race politics against my analytical framework and see how well it performs. And my claim is that if we want to have a mature conversation, if we want to say that the stakes are high and we want to succeed, and we want to succeed using the most efficient way possible because our resources are meager, the time that we have is limited, we want to achieve success as quickly as possible, we should be able to take a look at the kinds of politics that we engage in and determine which ones suck and throw them away and embrace ones that are the most effective. Okay, and if you have an emotional attachment to a kind of politics that after scrutiny appears to be bad, we should, if we genuinely care, if we say that we are moral actors who care about the objectives, we should be willing to walk away from it based on that analysis. Not everybody's going to be able to do that. Those people are bad actors, and we should be able to push them out of our movement or any movement that actually cares about success. So, using the framework that, and like I'm going to add one more exhortation here, which is that a lot of people, the way that they make these judgments is based on their intuition. Oh, this politics makes sense to me, like it's resonant, it speaks to me, blah, 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 blah. Your intuition sucks, okay? Because your intuition, especially in this case, is built on everything that you've learned in your life. And you've grown up in a world designed by, instrumented by neoliberalism, this very same order that we want to change. And everything that it feeds you in the media, in your education, in your corporate life, like in your day-to-day incentives, are meant to make you think in a specific way that enforces the stability of this system. You must distrust your intuition, and in its place, what you have to do is you have to build an objective framework by which you assess the politics that you engage in, and use that and trust that model in order to make the decisions that you have to make. Distrust your intuition in this case because the system created that for you. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of repeat a lot of what I said in that video, going through all the different parameters that we have to go through, and it's basically just like a checklist. Like the analogy, I don't know if I used it in the last video, but it's like I want to take, like somebody's sick in my family, I need to take them to the hospital right now. I need to get there as quickly as possible. So me and you are standing there trying to pick which car to take, right? And what I should be looking at are, does it have a good engine? Does it have good tires? Does it have enough space? Like all this stuff. This is my checklist, and this is what I need to go through. And the identity politics people are like, that car has bumper stickers that say heal the sick, protect the poor, world peace, we should take that car. And I'm like, hey, the fucking tires are flat, there is no engine, like we shouldn't take that. The car overheats every 5 minutes, we're never going to get into the hospital in time. So like, this is the nature of the conversation. I want to go through the checklist of what things are important and make sure we prioritize those before we look at anything else, and make sure that we make our decision based on those criteria. So here's our checklist. Your politics has to have good goals, and I'll explain what that means to me. And it has to have a good diagnostic model. I'll explain that. It has to have good prescriptions, and it has to be transmissible and populist. So let's go through each one of those things and then take a look at how identity politics, and in our specific example, race politics, fares along these criteria. This little checklist of like, does it have an engine? How good is the engine? Does it have tires? Are they inflated or not? Like that kind of stuff. So, I'm going to be using, I think about these things in technical terms. Like I borrow from technical models just because I'm an engineer. And so this is the way I'm going to navigate a lot of this stuff. And it's actually quite useful to borrow from different modes of thinking to inform how you think in different domains. So, on the question of clear goals, that seems pretty obvious. It's commonsensical. Like, yeah, obviously your politics needs to have an objective, but not all objectives are good and they're not all created equal. So, to my mind, political objectives need to have kind of like two important criteria. The first one is that they have to be properly constrained. Um, and what that means is that when you articulate what it is that you want to achieve, you can't have 50 different possible answers, some of them good, some of them bad. Okay, you have to be precise in your goal and how you measure your goal so that if you achieve it, it's exactly what you want. And the second thing is that the number of variables in your goal, like the number of things that you're optimizing for, has to be as narrow as possible. If you can just say, I want to achieve one thing, and that one thing brings me the most value, then you pick one thing. So the reason that we want to do those two things is because everything that in the world of like science or like math and computer science tells us that if you have an under constrained problem, and what that means, like there's a term in mathematics called overdetermined. So you have a system of equations that can have multiple solutions, and that's not a good thing, because what you end up with is something that you either can't find a solution for, or it gives you inconsistent solutions. So how does that manifest politically, and why does identity politics or race politics specifically fail that test? The way that it fails that test is because the primary optimization that race politics will come and demand is racial equality. And let's say that you measure it in like the American context by looking at the black-white wealth disparity. So the problem with that as your primary optimization is that it's overdetermined. That means that I can solve that problem by taking all the white people and making them 1,000 times poorer than they are, and taking all the black people and making them 100 times poorer than they are. And everybody is basically miserable, and I've achieved equality. And then I just need to have like a simple group of people that's super diverse up top, and I give them everything. So in my opinion, and I hope in most people's opinion, that's not a good solution. And you can imagine a whole bunch of different permutations of this where that optimization, because it's overdetermined, gives you undesirable outcomes that meet the technical brief. So it's a solution, it's just not a good solution. So the only way to correct for that is to start adding variables to your optimization, which brings us to the second thing that we don't want, which is a multivariate optimization. You want a narrow one, you want one that has, one, maybe two variables. But the reason that we want a narrow goal, a specific, like one thing, is because the more variables they are that you're optimizing for, the harder it is to actually search for a solution, and the more likely you arrive at bad solutions and you get stuck in them. This comes from the world of search optimization algorithms and computer science, where if you tell a computer, go out and find a solution, you feed it what's called a fitness function, this thing that allows it to measure whether it's getting closer or further away from your solution. If that thing has a single variable, then getting to an answer is relatively straightforward, right? It's just kind of like going along one axis. Is it closer? Is it farther away? Every step it knows if it's going towards the optimum thing. With every variable that you add, the solution space expands exponentially within search optimization algorithms, depending on how well correlated the variables are. So you have to be insanely careful that the variables that you're adding give you a ton of value. So if the first variable gives you 85% of the value that you want for your goal, and the next five give you another 15%, fuck these next five, okay? Focus on this thing because those next five are super expensive in terms of time, resources, energy, all this stuff. It makes the solution for this, it makes the search for the solution so much harder. The other thing is that because there are these other variables, you can get stuck optimizing for a lot of these at the same time, and you get trapped in what are called local minima. These suboptimal solutions that no matter what you do, like you get stuck in one, and then trying to get out of it is difficult because it makes one of these less important variables worse off than it was before. So in general, your goal has to be specific, has to be narrow, has to be constrained properly. And with identity politics, because the primary optimization is just not good enough, you start having to add extra stuff, and it makes your solution, your search for a solution, a lot harder. So not a great goal with identity politics. So that's not a win. Okay. The second thing that a politics needs to do is provide you a good diagnostic model. And kind of like the two things that I describe it as like sufficient and robust. So what do I mean by diagnostic model? Diagnostic model is a way of looking at the world and understanding it, explaining it, predicting it, you know, but that's not enough. So identity politics actually can do that. You know, you can say, I look at the world through a racial lens and I can see that there's a power dynamic that exists between the races. And I can use that power dynamic to explain a bunch of the effects. But is that explanation robust? Is the data that you get from that analysis robust? But more importantly, can you do something useful with that information? Sitting there and fucking hemming and hawing about something, just like talking about talking, okay, is not sufficient. It doesn't do enough for you. So, like, again, you know, explanatory and predictive power are not enough. It has to like produce prescriptions. So let's start by like looking at just the diagnostic model part. And within that, again, I have like several criteria. The first one is what I call high sensitivity and specificity. So most of what your diagnostic model needs to do is tell you who your friends are and who your enemies are. And high sensitivity and specificity doesn't ever cause you to confuse the two for one another. So like if you have an MRI machine and it's supposed to find tumors, high sensitivity means it sees all the tumors and it doesn't miss any. And high specificity is that it doesn't mark anything that's not a tumor as a tumor. And the same thing with your politics. You want to be able to know who your friends are and your enemies are and not confuse them. And then the second thing is for a populist politics to be successful, what you need is you need your diagnostic tool to be relatively immutable in the diagnoses that it produces. So you need to be able to hand it out to everybody, as many people as possible. And you need a lot of people because power is so small at an individual level in what we're trying to do. So you want to recruit everybody and you want all of their diagnoses to be the same. And you can't have their diagnoses of who their friends are and who their enemies are be different based on their skin color or their lived experience or whatever bullshit, because that creates a bifurcation, this splintering within your movement that your politics doesn't resolve immediately, right? It actually it adds to it. Identity politics, race politics, again, fails on both these fronts. It is actually has low sensitivity and specificity in the sense that if you're going to rely solely on the racial analysis, on a racial power dynamic, in order to determine who your friends are and who your enemies are, that is something that can be tricked very easily. Like your diagnostic tool, somebody can come and cheat it because it has actually low sensitivity and low specificity. They can tell you that this person, because they're white, is not on your side, and this person, because he's black, he's on your side. And because the system has immense power to control media, narratives, all this stuff, they can control that perception easily. If you've accepted the ideological model that race politics imparts upon people. So it's an easily tricked, spoofable politics that we should just reject on that front alone. Nobody should be legitimating something that can be so easily tricked. The other thing is the question of immutability. Like, the diagnoses that each person has is going to depend completely on who they are, what they see when they look in the mirror. And that's not a foundation for a good populist politics that everybody can come together with or come together on. So racial politics does not provide a good diagnostic model. That's obvious. Every single time somebody says, and people do this all the time, people says, ignore that. That's the cynical misuse of identity politics. What they're telling you right there is that identity politics has low sensitivity and specificity. And because of that, bad actors, cynical actors can manipulate it easily. And that happens all the time. And nobody's willing to tell me why it's acceptable to continue to legitimate a framework that is so vulnerable to that. Anyways, let's keep going. So from there, we need like I said, like, it's not enough for you to explain the world. Oh, black people are poor in this country because of racism, because white people have power and black people don't, and that happens because of race. Okay, you can absolutely do that. You can see it reflected in so many dynamics, and it's actually predictive. I can tell you what is going to happen with some statistical likelihood based on this racial analysis. My claim is that the data isn't actually that high quality, even though we imagine that it is, or a lot of people insist that it is. But my claim is that it's not, and this is what I meant by low sensitivity and specificity, and I sort of pointed out what that looks like, and I'll point out some more examples. But moreover, like, just pointing out the problem and talking about it constantly is great if you're in the business of talking about shit, which is what most ITPOL people, proponents of ITPOL, are mostly concerned about, right? They're in the business of talking about problems. They don't give a shit about actually solving them, like, to be honest. So the next requirement of a good politics, we said you have to have a goal, you have to have a good diagnostic, like a robust and sufficient diagnostic model, is that diagnostic model needs to tell you what to do to make progress towards your goal. And those prescriptions have to be measurable, okay? They have to be like, they have to be common sense, meaning they can't be the purview of the elite, where the elite, using some sort of complex models, tell you what to do and what not to do. This is a populist politics, so every single person should be able to intuit what the right action is based on the ideological framework that the politics imparts upon them. The politics, the prescription that it generates, has to sort of match the power that you have with the demands that you're asking for. So if your politics is saying, I want, I want the moon, or I want to get to the moon, and all you have is a hot air balloon, that's a mismatch between the power that you have and the demand that you want. And simply reasserting that demand doesn't actually solve that problem. And again, the prescription, okay, can't be easily spoofed. So if all you're asking for are things that are symbolic, then anybody can fucking do that for you, whether they mean it or not. That's a bad prescription. Okay, so what does identity politics recommends as its prescriptions? So let's go through them. And again, this is not a complete list, but this is what I see, and I'm sure there are a lot more. Identitarian representation. So pick people that belong to marginalized communities or to your specific community. So if you're Black, pick people who are Black. If you're Hispanic, people who are Hispanic, and so on and so forth. So, we already talked about bad diagnoses, right? So the friends enemies lens that identity politics provides is not very robust, and it makes it vulnerable. And like, I don't need to explain this to a lot of people. Everybody who's heard the phrase cynical misuse of identity politics knows what I'm talking about. Barack Obama oversaw the greatest loss of Black wealth in American history. The first thing he did after he came into office is recapitalize the worst people on Wall Street who were absolute predators to African American communities. In this election cycle, in the Democratic primary, Joe fucking Biden was made through his association with Barack Obama and under the guidance of Black leaders. He was made the Black candidate. Do you know how insane that is? And people will say, oh, it's just cynical misuse, cynical misuse. That's the fucking point. That's the problem. Your vehicle, the tool that you're using, is weak and vulnerable. Stop using it. So identitarian representation is a bad prescription when you have a terrible diagnostic model, which is true in this case. So every time people are like, oh, there's this like good representative and that person is identity 1, identity 2, identity 3, as if it's like it's added, like it inherently has value or virtue for them to be part, to have those identities. That's nonsense. You're legitimating a narrative that is easily exploitable, is easily manipulatable, is a bad diagnostic model with low sensitivity and specificity. The second prescription, so okay, that's garbage. There's like policies of special dispensation. We have a specific problem that affects this community. Then we need to create policies that address that problem. Essentially, where the flaw is in that approach is that it fails to match power with the demand in most cases. Most minority communities don't have enough power to make big demands, and so they either end up with getting token demands met that don't rise to the problem when you frame them within the context of special dispensation, or they make demands that cannot be fulfilled simply because, having 5%, 10%, 15% of the population be the beneficiary of a policy can't form a coalition that's big enough to succeed. Let me see. Okay, so, and then like the biggest hustle in identity politics is the hustle of discourse. Talking about talking. The people who are always like, we need to talk about this shit. We need to condemn shit. We need to... you need to denounce racism. You need to call out white supremacy. And even stuff like a politician has to have fluency in the language of race. Like all this stuff. It's just talking about talking. This stuff, none of it has demonstrated success, any correlation, any causal relationship between doing it and getting material benefit out of it. It doesn't, right? Because it's cheap. Anybody can do it. People who are cynical are probably the people who engage in it the most because it is so easy. It's not measurable. I can't actually see what it's doing in the world. Its effect isn't measurable. So all these prescriptions that identity politics recommends fail the basic requirements of what a good prescription is. So just like identity politics is failing all my fucking tests. And you can argue about these tests. You can say these are not the right requirements to measure politics by. That's fine. But let's have that discussion honestly without like you doing moral blackmail, holding a gun to the head of an organization that's trying to be efficient and trying to prioritize and do all that, like just be as effective as possible and just say you have to do this whether you like it or not, and we can't discuss its merits. But anyways, let me finish up. So the last piece, okay, and identity politics is a winner here. The last piece of a good politics is that it's transmissible. Okay, it's a populist, spreadable politics that people can consume, people understand intuitively. So like you have to have two criteria. One is transmissibility. People can communicate it to each other quite easily, and organizations can communicate it out to their base. And then the second piece is that it's like sticky and resonant. So that means that stuff in people's lives reinforce the basic ideology that the politics imparts upon them. And all these two factors are important if you want to have a populist politics. Now, in this case, like one, my claim is that this is a bad politics based on these other criteria to spread. It's a bad politics for people to adopt because it provides bad diagnoses and bad prescriptions, and it's in pursuit of a difficult or an amorphous goal in the end that actually might not be what people want. But like it's also important to ask, why is it so transmissible and sticky? Is that because it's like inherently good, or is that like also an indictment of it? And like I'll point to a few things that should make people weary of identity politics. So one is like identity politics is actually like there's something naturally resonant about it, whether it's like this evolutionary instinct towards kinship, or maybe like long defined social structures, like historic ones about tribalism and whatever it is, and it sort of piggybacks off of that. Okay, that's fine. But the other thing is that politically, Democrats, Republican, every bad actor trying to advance a corporate agenda, whatever the worst actors in the corporate world, wealthy donors, if you want to advance their agendas, Democrats and Republicans are more than happy to employ and reinforce the basic framework of identity politics in order to manipulate people into voting for them, into supporting them, and kind of just ignoring the consequences of the policies that are actually designed for the benefit of the corporate donors. The other thing is that if I'm a corporation that wants to exploit workers, if I want to pollute, if I want to, create missiles to bomb people, identity politics is also great because the frameworks that it provides, the practices that identity politics legitimates and places value on, representation, discourse, like talking about talking, like all this stuff I can wrap myself in, and I can whitewash all my terribleness. And because everybody on the left and on the right is actually legitimating this stuff and giving it value, then I can say that I'm doing what people are recommending. And you can call it cynical as much as you want, but you're fucking legitimating it all the time. So that's basically it. This is a clinical breakdown, sober reflection of what identity politics is, specifically the race based analysis, how it looks under the microscope of an objective framework of testing out politics' efficacy, its ability to do what a politics needs to do. And so, like, it doesn't fare well. It's not a good politics. But yet, people demand that we use it. People demand that we accept its premises and its ideological frameworks. And some people are like, well, it's okay. It's not a big deal. People like it. You know, why resist it? Well, the reason that you resist it is because, one, it's counterproductive. Like I already described why it's counterproductive, not just like benign, right? And anything that's even just like inefficient, shouldn't be accepted because we don't have resources to spare. The power disparity between us and the system, between the people who are trying to change the system and the system, is so vast that you should always be trying to optimize for maximum efficacy. So that shouldn't be acceptable. But beyond that, it is actually quite counterproductive, as I demonstrated. But moreover, it creates like these problems. Like some of them are like these evil little practices, these toxic practices that exist within the left. And I sort of talked about, like, the title of this this essay is throwing marginalized communities under the bus. People actually use that statement all the time, with like nothing to back it up, except that they, for some reason, feel like when they open their mouth, because they don't like the priorities that you're putting forth, the trade-offs that you're making, they're opening their mouth and they're channeling the grievances of a community that did not choose them. They don't have a constituency. Nobody voted for them. Okay, but because we've allowed this the soft idea of a socially constructed identity to have a set of grievances that is by its nature politically meaningful, and we must accept that a priori without interrogating it. And that moral priority takes precedence over everything. We allow bad actors, or not just bad actors, idiots sometimes, but in a lot of cases bad actors, to define what the priorities are or what practices we engage in. It creates a lowest common denominator politics that is always headed towards failure. The worst possible politics will always be engaged in because the worst people will get to dictate the terms, because they'll always search for the most effective way of manipulating the conversation. So that moral blackmail needs to end. Identity politics rejects, in large part, universalist goals. This is about universalist solutions, a socialist program. Those two things don't interact. You can't mix the two together. Okay, so there is no hybrid socialist idpol thing. It just doesn't exist. As much as you want to pretend like it does, you're only doing it because you want to allow these lib-poisoned assholes into your movement, and you can't see them walk away from it because you feel like it's necessary to have those people in. That's cowardice. Let them go. They're toxic. You don't want them. It essentializes stuff. It like naturalizes concepts like race, and politicizes it. So it forces people it denies people the right to make political decisions about how to form their coalitions in the best way possible. It says that or it says that this social construct is by its very nature political, and you have no choice but to organize around it, even if it's inefficient. It's nonsense. Okay, you have to be able to make choices about what is the most meaningful political construct that you can have that is effective. This is the point of this whole checklist, is to actually go through and see, okay, how do I organize? How do I think about the problem? What practices do I engage in order to actually get the results that I want? By naturalizing, essentializing the social construct, and then demanding that it be made political, whether people like it or not, you're denying people the ability to think rationally about the political program that they want to engage in. I don't know, like, I've talked a lot. I'm exhausted. Like, I actually don't have a lot of hope that people will change. Like, the bad actors, or the fucking hustlers, the people making money off of this, the people who get status and clout, who build little fiefdoms using this kind of shit, will continue to advance it. The cowards will continue to allow them and not push back because they're too afraid of the techniques that these assholes use. And so, like, I don't know, like, maybe what I provided is a weapon, by saying, hey, this is a rational, logical analysis of different kinds of politics. Let's use it. Let's have a conversation based on that. But if you don't even have the courage to engage in that conversation, then, like, what's the point? Anyways, I hope you hated this as much as I did. Please provide me some feedback. I always appreciate it. And thank you.